Hey, welcome back to my channel. Thanks for joining. For those of you who may be new here, welcome. My name is Thomas Patilli. I'm a comic book artist and an illustrator. And in this video, I wanted to take a look at the work of a great comic book artist, Ron Garney. We're not only just going to be looking at his art, but we're going to be comparing his penciled art to the finished printed comic. We'll be doing that by looking through this rare comic straight from my childhood collection. In the late 1990s, Ron Garney was penciling Captain America: Sentinel of Liberty. And shortly after the first issue debuted, this rough cut version was released. As far as I could remember, these rough cut issues were short-lived over at Marvel during this era. I also had a George Perez Avengers rough cut comic, but I'm not sure any others were ever made. If you know of any others that were made back then, let me know in the comments. I'll try to hunt them down. It's unfortunate though, because these were really amazing resources for aspiring comic book artists like me. What was rough cut? Well, they were penciled versions of an issue of a specific comic. They also had the written script in the back of the comic as well, so you could compare what the writer wrote to how the artist interpreted it. In recent years, DC does a version of this. I have a few of those as well. But like I said, these were really great resources for me growing up. This was before the proliferation of the internet and very long before social media. So seeing comic process stuff was very rare, and for me it was very treasured. When I did get a glimpse at it, I would pore over that stuff just to see how comics were being made. I loved the process stuff. I loved all the behind the scenes. This was something that I grew up really wanting to do. So not only was this very entertaining for me, but it was also very educational as well. I looked at the penciled version of this issue so many times, I pretty much had the whole comic memorized in my head. I don't think this was ever reprinted, and like I said, I think this was a short-lived concept back then, so it's likely that you have never seen this before. I actually hope that you haven't, because I'm looking forward to sharing it with you in this video. So what do you say we crack this book open and take a look? Okay, so here we go. Captain America: Sentinel of Liberty, #1. This is the actual issue, the printed issue. You can see this is from my collection. This is back from 1998. So I got this when I was about 12 or 13 years old. And my copy is not kept in the greatest condition. I was never really concerned with trying to keep these things in mint condition. The cover is completely torn off. But then this, like I said, was the rough cut edition. So it's the exact same issue, just a penciled version. So I thought for this video, we could go page by page and sort of just compare and contrast how the penciled version of the page compares to how it actually got printed. So these were kind of like early versions of an artist edition in a way, where it has a lot of the eraser marks and underdrawing stuff. There's some notes in the margin to the production crew. You get to see the blue line template underneath. As a kid, this stuff was like invaluable to me. I really got to see how even just a page like this was used, with all the different lines that were there to suggest full bleed and where the lettering should go. It was really just pencil on paper. And when I was a kid, that's really what I was working with as well. So to see that something so professional and finished could be made with the same materials that I was using was mind-blowing to me. And it was also super inspiring. And then of course, when I got to see just how things changed in the final version, after it was inked, after it was colored, after all the fancy effects were added, it sort of put things in perspective for me, but it also made me realize just how important the job of the penciler was, because everything is here. It's just that this is a more like enhanced version, but nothing on this penciled page is lacking or feels unfinished. Everything that Ron put down here was really leading the way in terms of how the final page was going to end up. He wasn't relying on color and special effects to kind of make his art look better or make the page shine. Everything was there, and it was just those little extra things were kind of just like the cherry on top. When you open it up, this is page 2 and 3, double page spread with the title treatment. We get to see here that it's written by Mark Waid, drawn by Ron Garney, inked by Dan Panosian, which is awesome. Dan Panosian is an amazing artist, known back in the 90s for his inking work, but has since become, in my opinion, one of the best comic artists out there today. And it's really cool to see the two of them team up and to see Dan Panosian's inks on top of Ron Garney. That's a really amazing collaboration right there. But now let's take a look at the penciled version of that double page spread. Look how cool that is. Awesome. And you can see here that he suggested where and sort of how the title sequence was going to be laid out. He didn't just leave that empty for the design team to put together. He was kind of suggesting some of that in his pencils there. And then, of course, the letterer and the designer built upon that idea. And if you get close here, you can see the underdrawing, the eraser marks, just some really great use of the pencil here. I always thought Ron Garney's art was so structurally sound. Like, he drew strong figures, technical details in a way that felt solid and finished, but it was never like over-labored. And then, of course, a young me was trying to figure out how the inker would take cues from certain parts of the pencils, where like certain areas like this, of course, in the pencils, you could see underneath the pencils. And then I was fascinated at how the inker would just black all that out. It started to give me ideas about inking my own work. And then even how like the coloring would put a color hold over some of the lines here with the fire. So every pass each artist takes on these pages is hopefully making it better and better. And I think this comic is a real great example of when that all goes right. And the coloring in particular really lets this beautiful art sing and shine. And the coloring, by the way, is done by Joe Rosas. I don't think I'm familiar with that name, but he did a really great job on this. Here's a side-by-side look of the next page. Whenever I would see penciled art, and like I said, it was usually either in a book like this, or there might be a couple of penciled pages in a wizard magazine or something like that. I would always be fascinated at how the artist would draw the background details. Backgrounds were always a challenge for me. They still are. I think they're a challenge for most of us in comics, especially when you're first starting out. And to see that you could suggest such detail with such fine pencil lines and have it read so clearly and be able to draw regular people in the background, like that stuff really, really fascinated me and got me super inspired. It was also really discouraging when I would try to do it myself because it never looked as good as the pros did it. But to this day, I'm just in awe at some of the beauty that just goes into a little panel like this. So many of us readers will just sort of take a panel like this for granted when we're flipping through a comic. But when you isolate it, and especially when you look at it in its most primitive form in the pencils, you just see that there's such care and skillfulness that goes into just a little panel like that. It's one of the reasons why I love books like this, and of course artist editions as well, because it really just highlights and showcases just the craftsmanship that goes into making comics. And then let's take a look at the colored version. Look at that. All the lettering, the colors. Back then and even now, of course, I still do prefer the broken down penciled version, even though the finished version is super cool as well. The artist in me, though, loves this stuff. One of the great things about Ron Garney's art is that he's just a true pro at comic book storytelling. Super clear, and you could also see so many of the fundamentals of even like how to draw comics the Marvel way. In many ways, he's very much a disciple of a lot of those original Marvel Comics greats. Just a guy who's a really great draftsman, knows how to draw, knows how to tell a story, and also has a really great sense of design as well. I mean, you look at a page like this and it's obviously so beautifully drawn, but there's also a really great level of design in the page layout that makes this inviting to look at and then also just reads clearly as well. Trying my best to show you side by side the pencil and the final. Feel free to take some screenshots. This stuff is really cool to look at, and if you're a process nerd like myself, hopefully you get a kick out of some of this stuff. Another double page spread here, a lot of action, a lot of stuff going on. A young me was fascinated and also very intimidated by how much perspective and architectural drawing was going on in these pages. It made me feel like I really needed to up my game as a 12-year-old. The funny thing is, looking at this now in present day, I feel the exact same way, actually. This stuff is just so beautifully done. And I think the thing that I was responding to back then, which is what I'm also still responding to now as I look at it as a grown man, is that it looks like the person drawing this was having a lot of fun. And it just kind of shows through in the art. And I don't know, I could be wrong. Maybe Ron was miserable drawing this, but the art doesn't give that vibe off. It looks like someone who was having a lot of fun drawing these stories and designing these pages. And I know that was the thing that kind of spoke to me as a kid. Whether I realized it or not, I was kind of picking that up in the artwork. And sometimes when you go back and you look at older work that you liked when you were a kid, whether it's in comics or animation, it doesn't really hold up anymore because you're seeing it with older eyes. You're seeing it after you've seen so many other things. Your tastes change, it matures. But when I look at stuff like this, in a weird way, I appreciate it even more. I'm seeing stuff in it that I didn't see back then. I remember as a kid when I picked up this rough cut comic, one of the things that I did was I took it to a photocopy place, and I made photocopies of these pages, and I tried to ink on top of them to practice my inking. And I didn't think or even know how to, or if it was even possible back then on a photocopy machine to like lower the levels of the printout, because when you photocopy something, especially on photocopy machines back then, the photocopy would often be even darker than the thing that you were photocopying. So these printed out really, really dark, I remember. And then I tried to ink on top of them, and it was really hard to show the distinction between the ink on the page and the ink that I was putting down on the paper. And it was really frustrating because I wanted to get those clean ink lines like Dan Panosian was getting. It also made me realize in the process of trying to ink this stuff that inking isn't just tracing. I realized that a lot more went into it, and it was a lot harder than I suspected. There's really just some great figure work and facial expressions, just really great visual storytelling. I don't know about you, I'm not much of a superhero movie person. I know there's some good ones out there. I haven't seen too many of them. But when I see stuff like this, I just think this stuff is so much better than any of those green screens, special effects, movies. To me, this is superhero stuff right here, done right. Because of the nature of pencils, when you're penciling, there's much more of a varied sort of level of grays and nuanced lines and sketchy lines. You could see here that it looks like Ron's using like the side of the pencil to indicate some of the black areas. So when you look at the penciled version of, say, like a panel like this, it looks very intricate and detailed because of course it is. But then when it gets inked and colored, everything kind of gets simplified and much clearer, as it should. But underneath these seemingly simple looking panels, when you see the penciled work, you see how much thinking and how much work really goes into it. All the perspective, all the design work of some of these, spaces that he's creating. It's very Jack Kirby in many ways. Some of these mechanical lines here, even these two figures, seems very, very Jack Kirby to me. I remember this was one of my favorite pages when I got this as a kid. And I think this was one of the pages that I tried to ink. I think it was mainly because of this explosion scene down here. Like, look at how cool that image is. The whole page is just laid out so well. It's staged so well. You know, in a lot of ways, like I said, this kind of stuff to me, it just seems better than the movies just because it's directed and staged in a way that's like, it's clear, it's fun. There's not a moving camera that's just making you feel like you're going to throw up every 2 seconds. And then it just has really impactful, awesome shots like this. Stuff like this, of course, is so cool to look at in pencil. And then, of course, to compare it to how it gets inked and colored. Really, really awesome. I mean, this page right here is almost literally taking a page out of How to Draw Comics the Marvel Way when they're showing you how to create dynamic Marvel storytelling. This is sort of like a masterclass in that. Check out this 246 panel grid where he's just putting the perspective here on an angle. The panel work flows really great. All the shots are tilted just slightly. The camera is always moving. And then, of course, you get a little break with the close-up. But just look at these backgrounds here. This is straight out of like Jack Kirby, John Buscema examples in How to Draw Comics the Marvel Way. I love it. And it's really cool to see the comparison side by side of the penciled version and the final version. As I look at these now, I almost want to scan some of these pages and print them out, sort of like I did a few weeks ago in one of my videos that I posted recently, where I inked over John Buscema Tarzan and Thor pieces. I kind of want to do that for these Ron Garney pages as well. It'd be cool to study and practice my inking on top of such a great, solid comic book artist. If that's something you'd like to see, let me know in the comments. That might be cool to do. I've said this before with other artists, and Ron Garney is definitely no exception, but when you see work like this, the artist just makes it look easy and effortless. The storytelling is so clear. It sort of comes to life on the page. The lines are so beautiful. It really makes it look like he wasn't laboring over this stuff. And I think that's the mark of a really great artist. There's the shot right there, of course. So cool. Man, that would be awesome to ink. Maybe that's the one I print out and ink. Look at that shot. Powerful, heroic. Just a great vibe. I think Ron Garney was like the perfect Captain America artist. Years later, in probably more recent years, Chris Samnee, I think, did a really great job on Captain America and evoked, I think, a very similar kind of vibe and feel. But yeah, look at this stuff, how great it is. And Dan Panosian did just an excellent job on these inks, really letting the artwork breathe and not overcomplicating things. Because we might be here for a while, I'm just going to go through the rest of this issue, just the penciled versions, and just kind of a little bit quickly go through some of these pages. There's just some amazing stuff. And like I said, if you're a process junkie like me, if you're a aspiring comic book artist or a comic book artist yourself, I think you could get a lot out of seeing stuff like this. I know I certainly do. And definitely feel free to screenshot some of this stuff. It's really cool stuff to study. You could get some really great ideas and inspiration behind page layout, and just so many of the fundamentals of comic book making is really all here. And like I said at the beginning of this, this stuff is done with pencil on paper. That's really that's as basic as you can get right there. And you've heard it said before that Jack Kirby created the entire Marvel universe with just a number 2 pencil and some paper. And I think that's something that is worth reminding ourselves of from time to time. We don't need any fancy tools, fancy software, special effects. You could tell a whole story, a really awesome story, and you could inspire people just with pencil on paper. That's it. I think if you don't have it here with just the most basic fundamental tools, I don't think any of the fancy stuff is really going to help you all that much. All that stuff is really just like, the cherry on top. This is really the foundational stuff that you really need to know. I mean, just look at the really great storytelling alone on just a page like this. And he also knows when to let the page breathe too. You've seen throughout this issue, there's so much great perspective and detail when it comes to backgrounds of all kinds, whether it's buildings and just regular people in the background, sort of like high-tech environments. But you don't want to overcrowd every page with that stuff either. It's nice to have moments like this where it's much more of an emotional response, and it's more about the lighting and the moment. And so having that ability to do both and kind of go back and forth, it's really nice stuff. It's great for the reader as well. It doesn't overwhelm the senses. And then here's the last page. And the cool thing about this issue is that it has the script in the back. And from what it looks like, this was written in Marvel method. So it doesn't look here like there was any real dialogue. This wasn't written as a movie script, the way a lot of scripts, comic scripts are written today, where it's panel by panel, all the dialogue is there, all the narration is there. This is really just a description of what is happening on each page. And then it's up to Ron Garney to just bring the whole thing to life and really just do his job, which is essentially be the director of this movie. This was still when the Marvel method was being utilized in Marvel. It probably wasn't too long after this where, full scripts started to be implemented. And nowadays that's sort of just like the norm. I think very few creative teams work with a Marvel method approach. I made a video on the whole Marvel method and how it's so effective and why it contributed to comics really being as entertaining and visually interesting as they once were. It really placed an emphasis on visual storytelling rather than trying to recreate some sort of movie or TV show pacing on the page. And so it's cool to be able to compare and contrast, go back and forth between the written version and how it was eventually illustrated. I know a little bit later today, that's probably what I'll be doing. Once again, I haven't read this since I was a kid, but I'll be going back and forth just to see how Ron interpreted those words. That's really a helpful lesson for me to even learn at this point. Thanks so much. I hope you enjoyed that look at the rough cut edition of Captain America: Sentinel of Liberty #1 by Ron Garney. Ron Garney is a great artist and a really cool guy as well. So if you're not familiar with his work, hopefully this video is an introduction to his wonderful art. Anyway, like I said earlier in the video, I think there was only one other rough cut edition, and that was a George Perez Avengers comic. I also have that comic, so if you're interested in taking a look at that, let me know in the comments below and I'll make that video. I always love looking at process stuff, especially penciled work, and comparing it to how it finally got printed. And I know there's different versions of rough cuts. DC has their version. I own a few of those as well. So perhaps we'll go through some other penciled comics and take a look at other artists' process stuff. As always, thanks so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, be sure to give it a like button. If you'd like to see more videos like this, consider subscribing to my channel. That's it from me. I'll catch you in the next one. Take care.